Thank you.
Super. Okay then. Well, take it away, girls.
Thank you. Okay, I'll just put up the presentation. Can everyone see and hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, wonderful. Okay, so hello, my name is Anitha, and today I'm going to be talking about my AutoEthnographic project on humour and the operating theatre. And it'll be told in the perspective of a medical student, me, finding my place in the surgical theatre. This project was compiled in collaboration with my supervisor, Dr. Baptista, who's on the call. Okay, so to set the scene, in my second year of placement, medical school, I undertook a 2-week hospital placement working under the anaesthetics firm. And this department oversees the patient before, during, and after surgery, as well as working with critically ill patients. So in our curriculum at that point in time, we hadn't really interacted with this practical side of medicine. So it was a fresh start going into the operating theatre. So from previous year groups, there is a presumption that surgeons are notorious for being difficult and unfriendly towards those junior to them, and all these stereotypes just further exacerbated the worries that I had before entering the theatre for the first time. And these are the questions running through my head, like, am I going to fit into the team? Will they acknowledge me and let me observe? Do I even know enough? So we had next to no teaching or any training prior to this. And the other question of, am I just making their lives harder by being another body in the room, being in their way? And lastly, one of the most important ones, where even is the theatre? How do I get there and get scrubs? So that was a good place to start. So after finding my scrubs and locating the department, I did have a lot of hesitance in entering the theatre. And this was mainly due to the fact that I was intimidated with all the big personalities that I was going to meet. And being so early on in medical school, having come out of 3 successive lockdowns at the time, I had quite a lot of imposter syndrome. We hadn't seen many patients face to face as everything moved online. So even though we were the youngest, most junior staff there was a real fear that if I got one thing wrong, I'd be labelled as not paying attention or not wanting to be there. But despite all these worries and all these presumptions, when I entered the operating theatre, it was a completely different story. So me and my peers were noticed and welcomed. The staff allowed us time to roam around and explore different rooms. And if ever we felt like we were being excluded from a conversation, they'd push us to the front to be included. And one thing that really did stand out to me is that they effectively communicated when they needed to, and they taught each other in a light-hearted manner. So for example, they'd quiz each other, and if one doctor had got the answer wrong, they'd make jokes and say, see, even a consultant got it wrong, so you guys are okay to get it wrong. And this just made it easier to not be quite so afraid of getting the answer wrong, which was one of my initial concerns. And it really did reinforce that there was no such thing as a silly question. And one of the more memorable moments is the team dynamic. So throughout the surgery, the team were laughing and joking, and they never compromised patient safety. They speak about what they were going to do so that anyone could correct them if they had got it wrong, and weren't afraid to make mistakes or be held accountable for any mistakes. So seeing the transparency amongst the healthcare staff really did make me feel less reluctant to participate. And this experience alone just reinforced how the smallest of things could actually make such a positive impact on a person feeling comfortable. So I've mentioned humour in my personal account, but what actually is it? So according to the Cambridge Dictionary, it's the ability to find things funny, the way in which people see that some things are funny, or the quality of being funny. So quite a lot of funny. So that's the literal definition. But what does it mean for a medical student undergoing their first clinical placement in a surgical environment? So from my placement, one example of this that had stuck with me was when, as a team, before we start surgery, we do a safety checklist. And this confirms the equipment that we're going to use, the surgery we're performing, amongst other things. And a component of that checklist is to introduce all members of the team by name and role. And we normally just say name and role, but this time round, the nurse did actually mention to say something funny about ourselves. So as we introduced ourselves around the circle, we're all laughing about the weird things that were being mentioned, and there were a few dance moves in there. And looking back at that experience, I remember thinking to myself, surely before starting surgery, it wouldn't be this casual. And so often it made me reflect that we are told to act professionally and to stick to the script as much as possible, that we actually do forget that we are all human. And by showing that human side to the profession, it did actually ease my hesitance and it increased my own self-confidence. It made it easier for me to approach senior staff, not only in the theatre, but for example, on wards or within medical school. And comparing this to other experiences that I've had in GP, where the doctors were a lot more strict, I could see that in theatre, Humour also made the staff less stressed. They'd created an environment that was safe and nurturing, and it was an open place to learn. And this is actually something that has been seen in other autoethnographic studies, especially in ICU staff, intensive care staff, where humour was used to be a strategy to focus away from the serious side, and it prepared staff to deal with that kind of stressful environment. So the use of humour, as mentioned in the previous slide, it alleviates the tension in high pressure settings such as surgery or ICU. It also impacts learning as it allows room for error. It encourages students to make mistakes and to subsequently learn from them. And when there's relatability with humour, more senior staff can be seen as approachable, and it promotes a safe space. And in my case, when I was in the theatre, they would do pop quizzes as they performed the surgery and explain any mistakes on the human body in front of us. And it was a good use of informal teaching opportunities, as it could be replicated in person, and it makes the material actually a lot more memorable. And then lastly, a student's sense of belonging impacts their participation in activities. So harmful stereotypes can actually hinder certain students entering medical careers, and it can actually make it difficult for those students to actually integrate themselves into the team. But saying all this, we do have to be mindful that humour can tip both sides of the scale. So it can increase rapport with staff due to relatability, but it can also solidify a distinct line between the students and the HCPs, with the students being seen as outsiders. However, in my experience, it was encouraging, and humour in itself was used as a tool to learn, to de-stress, and it did promote student engagement. So what can we take away from this? So both my experience and the research that I've mentioned in these slides doesn't certainly conclude that humour should be used in medical education, but it does bring a perspective in which healthcare staff could be a bit more mindful towards the barriers that stop a student from engaging. And in my personal reflection earlier on that I mentioned, the sense of community, the sense of togetherness, those were key factors in determining my participation. And one thing about humour is that it can't be faked. And having open and informal conversations where we share our vulnerabilities can really have a positive impact. So just within this call to the room, if you guys reflect and think back to something that stood out to you, how many of them were funny? I mean, we've started to use it in education. We use silly anagrams, acronyms, or anecdotes, and this is used to reinforce learning. And studies have actually shown that it results in better recall and retention, and this is useful and something to consider for clinical educators. So bringing this all together and rounding off this presentation with the theme of the conference, like birds that flock together, all these pieces do fit together too. And they set the scene for and landscape for successful participation and engagement for medical students. So thank you for listening. And this is my email, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you for that, Anitha. I am minded, and listening to you, I'm minded of what was one of my very first encounters with anything sort of autobiographical and narrative, and that was Howard Becker et al.'s The Boys in White. Have you read it?
Oh, no, I haven't. I'm not familiar.
Very old. It's very old, 1960 something, but is the really foundational for the sort of work that we're doing these days. And it's very American, and it's about boys, but I really recommend it for anybody looking at medical topics. So it's great fun. And what you say about the acronyms, my daughter's a doctor and my son's a dentist, and they've got some really filthy acronyms.
Yeah.
You're well aware of them.
Yeah.
Does anybody have any questions now? I mean, we'll come and have a wider discussion when Tuyet has spoken as well. Has anybody got any questions coming up now? I can't see the room, so somebody will have to help me with that.
Yes, sorry, 2 seconds. We're just having problems with her slides. So if you give us a couple of seconds, we're hoping to have them with you in just a couple of moments, all right?
Yeah, fine. Thank you.
Yeah, I just wondered if you could give us some more examples of the kinds of humour that you've encountered in your in your surgery training.
Yeah. So this was a one-off experience, I will say. So I'm currently in 5th year. So this was an experience where I was in 2nd year. And since then, I haven't seen humour being used in the within teaching in clinical environments. And I think it really kind of shows, because speaking to Anna, my 2nd year experience was so memorable, and it was due to that humour, them using it in their teaching, in their learning, and the sense of belonging for me as a student. So I think with them, it was with the experience that I mentioned, it was mainly incorporating it into teaching. So for example, an example that we had was they'd put each doctor and each medical student to different ends of the theatre, and they'd give us 30 seconds to draw as much of the homunculus as possible, which is the sensory and motor innervation of the body. And then they'd ask us to keep on swapping papers between ourselves. And it was just a learning opportunity where we can see what others have thought of, what we hadn't thought of. And it was really kind of funny, because you can imagine a lot of doctors just running around the room in surgery. So that was an example.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, that's lovely. It seems like a sort of is it a kind of self-deprecating humour then? Something that is there something about the nature of the humour that's inclusive with regards to students and others, if you see what I mean?
As in, the humour wasn't at the expense of anyone else. It was.
Yeah, I guess that's what I'm getting at. That kind of in-group, out-group, sort of the possibility of humour to exclude, whilst including at the same time. So that's really interesting that it's actually more of a kind of inclusive sense of belonging, noticing everybody in the team.
Exactly.
And that was something, and chipping in just a tiny bit, that was something that I asked Anitha about, particularly in relation to the use of dark humor, and
Yeah.
whether, because these are very emotionally charged environments, and emotionally loaded environments. And I was, wasn't there anything that you would consider as dark humor in this specific experience or further down the line? And no, that's the answer. So
Yeah.
that was surprising in a way, because it can be perceived as a coping mechanism of some kind that would trigger some other reflections. But actually, that hasn't been the case of something that Anita has been witnessing either. So
Yeah. I think that's really exciting, because you know what you mentioned, boys in white, and then there's kind of participant observation studies since then, and that there is that kind of use of humour to create that sort of sense of flock at the expense of others. So create, you know, calling people the worried well, for example, and stereotyping, you know, oh, another malingerer, for example, or you know, that way of kind of using humour to parody patients. But that's really exciting that humour isn't being used in that way, and it feels really progressive.
Yeah.
I'm going to give this back now. I think this.
I think that there is an awful lot of awareness these days around, from what I gather from people that I know who work in that area, that it's very different. But then, you know, they do still tell gallows humour stories to cope sometimes with the awfulness that can happen when people die or things go wrong. I can see Sally's got a hand up.
Hi, Anitha. Thank you for that. You seem very familiar. I'm not sure if we've met before. Yeah. Anyway, thank you very much. It's making me think of a couple of things, actually, because I think what you're saying is it's kind of specific to, you know, you're drawing attention to it being used in teaching as a way to alleviate hierarchy, in a way, I guess, is what it felt like. That you know, there was kind of a meeting there. and I love stand-up comedy. And I was watching recently. Now it's going to go for me. It'll come. It's called The Gender Agenda. It's on Netflix. It's not an advert. But all the comedians are different kind of queer and kink comedians from around the world, and they're making important points, but there's a bit of humor in there. And for me to accept the important points and to be kind of pulled up in some way over certain things is much more palatable for me to accept the things that they're saying. So I got a feeling, isn't it lovely then that because often I hear, we're in the School of Medicine, and I used to be a therapist to a lot of nurses. You know, I hear about that very bruising, being put down, bullied, and you know, all the things you were kind of hearing about beforehand. And it's just so unnecessary in teaching, and particularly in the medical profession. So that was really refreshing to hear, actually.
Thank you.
One of our students has just done his master's in humour in psychotherapy.
Oh, okay.
There can be a place, because we actually have quite a lot of humour when we're teaching with the students. So yeah, so thank you for that.
No, of course. No, of course. Thank you.
Hannah Gadsby, just come to me. Fantastic.
Thank you. Is there one more question, or shall we move on to Tran's presentation now? Looking forward to Belonging, a Search Within Cultures.
Yes, thank you. We had some technical issues because I'm showing some film. So basically, I'm doing a PhD by practice with documentary, and it's a search on belonging between cultures, because I'm half Vietnamese and half German, and it kind of traces back to my grandmother who I've been filming. And I will show 4 short clips, which will kind of show how I've been trying to find my way through. So the first is a search on a graveyard in Germany where my Asian and German ancestors lie, and I was looking for their graves. The second one is an excerpt of looking at the family photo album with my grandmother. Then there's an exploration of movement of water that distances my grandmother and me, because she lives in Germany, but she's Vietnamese, and to locate where I am in this whole process. And the fourth one is an attempt of a connection between there and here, because she gave me some seeds to grow, and I took them, so they were Vietnamese herbs, and I took them to Scotland, where I live, and tried to grow them in the really cold soil. So I hope yes. But do I need to repeat anything? Or okay. No. Okay. So I'll show the first one, which is the graveyard. I think it's not working with the screen share on this.
So perhaps you haven't shared your sound. If I just mute me, because we'll clash.
Or could I share the YouTube link in
Yes,
the
we
chat?
can.
Maybe we can just do that.
Yep.
And then tell the online participants that they can also click on it.
Yep.
Does it work?
They can hear you. So if you stop sharing your screen, there's a link from our presenter in the chat. If you give that a click, we're going to play that in the room as well. Should there be sound?
Ob mir sag es so, schon gemacht von dem ersten Begegnen, ist die Sonne aufgegangen, mit ihr ganze Blau, die Schatten von uns gesehen. Sag es so, sei gesund, sei zu gehen müssen wir.
Don't buy another pair of glasses until you've seen what this new invention can do. These self-adjustable glasses are taking the world by storm. They let you achieve a perfect 20/20 vision at any distance, which means you won't have to visit your eye doctor ever again. They were created by an optician.
Okay, thank you very much. They did grow then.
Could you see them?
Yes, yes, you got a crop. That's very good. Have you eaten them and used them yet?
Actually, yeah, I've eaten some. I brought them to my annual review last week and they were eaten.
Well, that's quite an interesting one, wasn't it? I mean, I've never had a student do that for me. So. Anyway, thank you very much, Maya. It was very, very evocative. Do we have any questions, please? Again, I can't see within the room, so.
Thank you. So with my love affair with nature and gardening, I have to pull upon spring. What did you receive in that moment when you were touching the soil and you were touching the seeds? Because it was a very romantic and beautiful moment with the sun and you pulling the seeds out, and it felt like something. Can you share what that something was?
So I had taken the whole bag, was like 30 different kinds of seeds, and my grandmother had put with her typewriter like every single Vietnamese name. And I don't know, there was like a moment of complete, it was very quiet in the flat, and I had really time to connect with her through that. And I looked at all the names, and then I wrote them down to then write it myself when I will plant them. And it was like a reconnection of something that doesn't really have space in my usual life. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
No space in your usual life. Could you say a word more what's on in your usual life? That would be wonderful to get the possibility to connect that pieces with each other.
Yes, so I think so my usual life is in Edinburgh with I'm doing my PhD, and before that I grew up in Germany, and it's as if this part, like it's my mother's side of the family, and although they've like the whole family is like in Germany and they're really living the culture, but somehow it didn't feel like there's a connection. You know, I'm living in a Western like society, and I have no Vietnamese friends or any community around, and so it's like it's a hidden, like a compartmentalized part of my life that I only access when I speak to family. And I think that the project or the search is about finding ways in and out to make it more part, like through writing and filming, I'm already engaging with it in my everyday life. Yeah, to make space for those roots, I guess. Yeah. Gail, right?
Thank you. That was lovely. Can you tell us a bit more about how you're weaving it all together in the piece of work that you have to end up with?
Yeah, I don't know yet. Yeah, so I think it's very fragmented, which I think really mirrors the experience. And I tried to already make the connections for this year's annual review, and I couldn't, like, it was really impossible. And the only way where I feel that it's becoming to get interwoven is through nature and through growing. I see, and yeah, I wrote down eco-AutoEthnography today. It was like, just because it has the possibility, I think, to transcend the social and cultural languages. I was like looking for a language that can show both of them. And my grandmother gardens, and it's like, and then, you know, the theme of mothering is Mother Earth. So that is the window.
Have you asked your grandma about her? Is your grandmother still alive?
Yes.
So have you had any conversations with her about?
Yes.
And what's her take on it?
I mean, every time she calls, she asks, "How are the plants? How are the plants?" First question. And then she says, "How does the work go?" And then every time I remind her it's about you. And then, yeah, there's this moment of what? And then, yeah. And then she says, "I didn't know I was that important." Yeah.
I just wanted to say that your response to the question about your project reminds me of the seeds after you plant them before they are herbs, right? That there's a lot going on inside, but we haven't seen the full. And then you watch as they come out of the ground. That's where you are. You're in that transitional space.
Thank you.
I'll be quick. I just thought it was really beautiful, the film, and I don't know if it's intentional, but it reminded me of your keynote on the thin places, and it struck me with the imagery and the walking in the sand and the sea, and then the planting of seeds. That the thin places are those kind of spaces where they're timeless, where those activities have happened across generations, so that they're points in the kind of time-space continuum where you can really kind of hear that calling of the past and transmit into the future. I don't know, that's what I took away from it, and I think it was really beautiful.
I wouldn't want to force any connections or anything, but is there any humour in here to link with what Anitha and Anna had to say? Do you see that? Or do they see any connections there? As I say, I wouldn't want to force it, but sometimes people do see things. Like you've just linked with Chris's keynote, and I was thinking when you were talking about your grandma, about Brian's presentation as well, about his mother's thinking about him and family and what family meant in his family. You know?
You know, what I've been thinking here between these two presentations that we've seen is that I'm fixated on the notion or the idea of theater, right? And specifically in the first presentation, you know, we have this notion of sort of the operating theater, right, as a kind of workspace, a viewing space, a space of policy, procedure, of operations, of human social relationships. I'm interested in theater through a kind of dramaturgical kind of process of the who, what, when, where, why, relationality, and how we make things work. I'm interested in theater as social drama and the emergence of relationships, right? And so in this, in your presentation, I think of the graveyard as a theater, right? As a space of relationships, of histories, of narratives, of orientations, and why we go to graveyards to revisit, to regroup, to reconnect, to find parts of ourselves, right? And the dramas that unfold there. I'm thinking about the family album as a theater, right? Because I see the beautiful hands of your grandmother, and I see those narratives and her reflections, right? That's tying you back and enveloping you into the social dramas, right, of your life, right? In some ways, reintroducing you to parts of yourself that you didn't know. I'm thinking about that when I'm thinking about the water and this kind of eco sort of autoethnographic moment, and nature, right, as dramatic as theater, right, and then this moment of planting seeds, right, which is dramatic, right, in the sense of time, effort, energy, of strategy, of technique, of nurturing, of protecting, of seeing it go through its evolutionary stage, of consumption, right, of bringing it to your defense, right. And so there's a theater at play here in both of these presentations, and we have to figure out what our role is, right, that we play within the context of the making sense of both our lives, but the practical environments in the case of Anitha, of being within the context of hospitals, and the roles that we play and the role that humor plays, right, in trying to cut across, right, feelings of despair or feelings of hope or death or longing, trust, right. And so it's a theater thing for me, right, and the social dramas that unfold within these two pieces that we've seen already. So very interesting work. Thank you.
And Pascal has made a comment. I don't know whether you can see the comments where you are, but I find it, is it okay for me to read it out, Pascal? Are you happy with me reading it?
Yeah.
Great, thanks. I find it very touching. I'm actually in tears thinking of my grandparents, what they went through as immigrants from wars, the seeds she is planting in you as you were growing hers, and what an impact you are having on your grandma. Making her your main project is such an important gift. And her saying, I didn't think I was that important. That's a lovely comment, Pascal. Thank you very much for that. Yeah.
So I just want to make a couple of observations. I hope that's okay. The first scene, the graveyard scene, the word that just stuck with me was just searching. There was just like, even from the point where we see, where the mulch is, to the point where you're walking around the graveyard, there's a searching feeling, that just like emotionality that just kind of swept me away. And then the grandmother scene with the family album, if I forget, there is no one who will remember. And that really just hit me like really hard, because I feel like, this is a common theme, especially in marginalized communities or communities that are often underrepresented in our scholarship. Just this whole idea of, there's this repository of knowledge and of knowing that we just don't take advantage of, we don't seek out, and we don't affirm as legitimate and valid knowledge. And so that just really resonated with me. And then the exploration of water, it just hit me, because you talked about water earlier, Dr. Alexander, in Dr. Chris's clip. And it made me wonder how water has this amazing capacity. First of all, water, I feel like, especially in the African diasporic community, the importance of water is huge. But also just globally, how water has this capacity to both help us forget and to help us remember at the same time. And I don't know, like, I see the the sand, and I see the waves rushing on and, rushing out, and it helps me remember about, this important legacy. But also as the waves recede, it like wipes everything clean. So in a way, it's like it's forgetting, it's erasing. And so I've never thought about that before, but right now looking at your clip, it made me think about that and how it kind of like almost like a through line, I think. I'm not sure if that's right, but that almost like a through line. And then that final scene where you're planting the seeds from your grandmother, I saw, I was really taken. I'm a writer, so when I see you writing on the little signpost, and then this happens. We write something, and our hand is occupied with something else, and so as we write, things begin. We have a less firm grasp on the thing that we're writing on. And the handwriting gets kind of shaky, and it made me think about how, if we don't have a grasp of, going back to your grandmother's scene or the photo album, if I forget there was no one else to remember, it's like this ephemeral thing of trying to hold on to something and trying to record it at the same time, and it feels like almost impossible. And I don't know if that resonates with you in any way or not, but those are just some of the observations that I had. That felt like it was a metaphor for what you writing that out felt like a metaphor for what you're actually trying to do. So.
Thank you, Anna.
Can I just say something quickly? Because I just saw that my father actually joined. And just to say that on that graveyard, there's my Asian relatives whose graveyard you've seen, but there's also my fatherly grandfather, and his graveyard doesn't exist anymore, so I couldn't film his grave because, and I just, because you said not to forget or to remember, and I just wanted to say, just to say that we remember even though his stone isn't there anymore.
Thank you.
Wave. Oh no, he's gone now. He was just there. Okay, thank you.
Anna.
Yeah, it's also an observation. Also, I love what the colleague mentioned about theater. I really love it, and it made me sort of reinforce this idea of that both in relation to the connection between both presentations, these elements of emotional geographies. I borrow the concept from human geography, right? And emotional but it's such an interesting traveling concept to other disciplines. And I think that both presentations do have these powerful emotional geographies, and how emotions are definitely entangled with specific spaces and places, and how that is impacting on the identity of each one of you. And it's absolutely fantastic to see the flourishing, and this element of flourishing and the materiality that Mai brought into the presentation, almost like that Anitha didn't really touch on, like the objects from the theater specifically, the actual real objects, the materiality that Anitha could have explored as well. Also related to the objects, relating to those emotional geographies, and also to the extendedness. I'm not really sure whether even this is the word. The extension of ourselves and our own identities through other things and other beings, and again linking back to who we are and ourselves as human beings, and who we are in different places and spaces, and what we embody and occupy and bring in. And it's so powerful, and I just wanted to put these thoughts out there as well, because I do think that we can also learn from these other connections to different disciplines and bringing in those interesting concepts to sort of make sense of things that weren't put together as specific projects together, but that they had connection in these beautiful presentations and room. So yeah, thank you for that.
Well, that's quite interesting, because going back to the question that Mai was asked about bringing it together, and you say you've got your reflection coming up shortly. Everything can be linked to everything else. I think anything you can do that, and it doesn't necessarily end up being forced either. We see these connections that come from our living in the world and being there and relating with people and places and so on and so forth. So. Yeah, that's great. It's a shame Julie's not well and hasn't been able to be here, but her absence has allowed us to have a longer conversation and to really get down to discussing some of the things that have resonated for us all in these presentations. Before we go, because I'm going to say, yeah, we can end a little bit early, just like a couple of minutes early, I think it is. Does anybody have anything else that they would like to raise or add or ask or whatever? Or probably.
I was going to extend on the last point, actually, something that I really like, the idea of objects and how you can put yourself in objects. And you said something about sharing herbs at a meeting. And I don't necessarily want to ask you a question because I think you've given us so much of yourself already. And I've really been struck by what you talked about fragmentation and not being able to make lots of really neat links. And I would just lean you, and I can invite you to lean into not having to do that. Sit with the fragmented parts of yourself, and it speaks to one of the presentations we had yesterday too. So I think this might be an opportunity for you to play around a little bit, see what feels comfortable, and if it doesn't feel comfortable, don't do it. Don't be forced to make something very neat because other people might want it. and don't feel like you have to share everything. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Well, as I said, I felt very honoured to be asked to do this. I feel even more privileged having done it and shared with you your work and this session and bringing us all together. So thank you very much. Thank you to both sets of presenters, and thank you to the audience and for taking part in the way that you have. So shall we have a clap?